Next up, I'm going to tie a version of Steve Jennings' Gray Ostrich Mayfly. I have tied this fly before on the bench. Thanks to my buddy Dwayne Morris for showing me the where to find it, which was on an old Sport Fishing on the Fly video, probably about, who knows, 27 years ago or something. Don's really young in it. And he's talking to Steve Jennings' fly tyer Ray Rao, where he ties the actual fly. Anyways, it's a fantastic fly. I've used it up in the interior quite often. I tie a version kind of like it with my microglint mayfly, so I'm kind of combining both of them. And I'm going to show you a mayfly that should work pretty good for the spring. So I've gone ahead and started my thread on my, it's a curved long hook by Partridge, size 16. This one here. And I've got just some rust colored thread in the vise there. So for the tail is to be speckled, and also for the legs. And Steve prefers partridge, so I've got a partridge feather here with some speckling on it. I'm just going to strip off a little chunk. I'm not going really for the 3 typical tails that a mayfly has. I like to put in a good chunk on there, not too long, probably about 3/4 the shank length. Just tie that in. Make sure you do a couple of turns underneath it, just to hold it up. And I'm just going to snip this off. Tie over top of it. Take my thread up. Next, tie in your ribbing material. So for me, I'm going to use the Olive Microglint by Semperfli. I used it in my Microglint Mayfly. The original was done with just monofilament, so it didn't have any color whatsoever. I do love this olive color, especially in the spring. As you notice, there's a bit of a theme with my flies, and most of them are olive or have olive in them. It's just a really good color, maybe because of the damsels or something in the springtime I found. Next, you want to tie in the shell back. So the shell back I'm using is pheasant tail. It's like a brown dyed pheasant tail. And I'm just going to tie it in by the tip, so it's very much like a full back, or even a skip nymph, where it's got the full shell back on it. Make sure you tie it right on top, like so. Bring my thread forward. And next, I'm going to tie in my body material. So for the body material, I'm using the Gray Ostrich Herl. And I've got 3 pieces for a fly this size. Just go ahead and you can snip the tips right off. I'm going to be needing those. I'm going to wax my thread. Just a little bit there. Just capture them, tie them back. And I'm just going to take all 3 materials to make sure that they're all lined up properly with where I tied my last wrap, and then bring my thread forward to about the point where I want to start my wing case, about the 2/3 or 1/3 point on the hook. Now take your Gray Ostrich Herl and you can just give it a slight twist. That'll keep it nice and fluffy. Wrap this forward. That episode I'm referring to is the Lac de Roche episode done by Sport Fishing on the Fly, and it is on YouTube. You can look it up. One of the lakes I'm hoping to get to this year up by the 100 Mile area, where I'm also from, where my family is from. Just wind this back. So I just tied it forward, wrapped it up the hook to make a nice fluffy body. Next, I'm just going to wet my finger a little bit with some water and just brush my ostrich herl down to give a place for my shell back to nicely sit. So next, I'm just going to take my shell back, fold it over, and tie it down. Lock it down, as my buddy Brad Noel says. And now I'm just going to, before I cut it off, I'm just going to give it a little whip finish. Make sure it doesn't come apart. Like so. You can just cut that right off. Tie through it. I'm just going to Try and even up this little space here. Now you can take your ribbing material and start winding it in nice even spaces up the hook, probably about 5 to 6. Just use your thumb to push the ostrich down. You can sort of wiggle it through. Oh, like so. Hang on. Like how that one went. Maybe one more. Like so. And I'm just going to tie that off. And that's the top of it there. Next, I'm going to take another chunk of pheasant tail to tie in for my wing case, and I'm going to tie it in by the butts, but I'm snipping it down quite a ways down, so not so thick and not so thick. And just tie that right on top. Try and even it up with your thread. Make a nice platform for your thorax. And then you can just measure as well and see, you know, what's my wing case going to look like when it's done. How far is it going to go back? That's about how I like it right there. Next, I'm going to take the, for the thorax, I'm going to use hare's ear, not the ostrich. I've pulled some hare's ear right off the mask here. I've got, I'll show you. Pull a little bit right off the ear and also some of the fluffy stuff down here to make a little dubbing. And it's just what I prefer. I do a lot of mayflies with just hare's ear and pheasant tail with different ribs and stuff. I love hare's ear. It's just really nice material to work with. Let's build a nice little thorax here. You don't want to crowd it too much. Hang on, I'm just going to go backwards here and like that last wrap. Yeah, be sure not to crowd your head. Next for the legs, I'm just taking another one of the partridge feathers and I've removed the tip and pulled everything down that I don't want to use on my fly and out of the way. I'm just going to actually remove it. So it's like so. And now I'm just going to lay it right on top. Take a couple of turns. Measure, make sure they go back the length I want them to go back, which they do, about maybe two-thirds of the body back. I'm going to actually tie over top of this feather here. And then snip it clean. Like so. I'm just going to make some nice wraps because when you're tying any kind of a wing case in, it's very difficult to snip it nice and clean. So I'm just going to make sure that my thread is at the back here and give it some more wax. A little bit of wax for my wing case to sit on. And I'm just going to make sure my feathers are separated, and you can pull your wing case forward like so, and even just flatten it out with your thumb a little bit like so, making sure it's right on top. Just going to shorten my thread here. Still pull it, and you've only got a couple of wraps on there, and just make sure that's nice and flat. Now I'm just going to chop it a little bit shorter and do a few whip finishes. Always whip finish these wing cases before you cut them off. There's still a good chance you might cut your thread like I just did in the video that I had to send it on as a blooper, but I would say this is one of the most difficult things that my personal challenge with fly tying is these wing cases, trying to get them nice, clean. One way you can do it is just by pulling the pheasant tail fibers individually and breaking them, but you really do risk making your wing case breaking it if you do that. So I'm just going to kind of lay the scissors flat up against the hook eye, take a snip. I'm going to take my thumbnail, push it back as much as I can. I crowded my head here, but you know, I'm going to try and just work with it and do some whip finishes. It's not going to be perfect every time. And that just goes to show that it doesn't matter, you know, how long you've been tying flies and stuff, you can still make little mistakes here and there, and that's one of my little personal pet peeves. I haven't actually been tying pheasant tails for a while, and when I first started tying more seriously for an entire year, every time I sat down at the vise I tied a pheasant tail, just because this is one of my biggest challenges right here. But I didn't do it too bad. I still have some room left in the eye of the hook to get my line through, so I'm just going to snip that off after 2 whip finishes. And you can also take some crazy glue and glue that further, just for the purpose of the video. I'm not going to. So that's it. That's a gray ostrich mayfly variation.